to whom no one else paid any heed. Others gathered in one spot all who were afflicted by hunger throughout the whole city and gave bread to them all. When this became known, people glorified the Christians' God, and convinced by the very facts, confessed the Christians alone were truly pious and religious. What they were saying? No. It wouldn't have done a bit of good during that plague for them to have been going around passing out tracts. What did good was being willing to care for the sick. I don't mean to be harsh, but if the church universal, I'm not just talking about Darrow and Martinton, if the church universal would be the church, we wouldn't have to worry about places like Angel's House. We wouldn't have to worry about government programs to feed the poor and WIC cards and anything else. If the church universal was being the church, the hungry would be being fed. The naked would be given clothing. Those who were imprisoned would be being visited. In fact, those who had health care issues would be ministered to and taken care of. Thirdly, good deeds actually validate the good news. I'm sure you know the story, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. One day, Jesus was at a house and he was doing some teaching, and the house got rather crowded. And there was a man who was paralyzed who was on a bed. And his friends knew that if they could get him to Jesus, he could be healed. They had heard the stories. And so they did what every one of us would do. They climbed up on the roof and cut a hole in the roof. He'd say, yeah, right. Well, first of all, they didn't have to climb up. There were stairs because people used to use their homes, the roof of them, for a place to sit in the evening. But still, they dug through that roof. Can you imagine being in the room underneath and all of a sudden bits and pieces of the roof start falling? The man is lowered. Jesus sees their faith. I think he's talking about the faith of the friends as well as the sick man. And he says to the man who is on the bed, your sins are forgiven. There is a direct correlation, biblically speaking, between sins and health issues. It's there. Jesus says, your sins are forgiven. In the background, and there's even some Greek words that sound like grumbling and mumbling that are used by Luke when he writes this accord. In the background, there are some of those high-nosed people, snobs, Pharisees. Oh, who's this guy think he is? You know, he's going to forgive sins. Probably some of the ones who were just saying a little bit earlier, isn't this Joseph's son? And what does Jesus do? He recognizes where they're at mentally, and he says to them, so that you can know, so that you can understand, so that you can see that I can say the good news, your sins are forgiven. To validate the good news that I've just shared with you, let me do this. And he said to the paralytic, rise, take up your bed and walk. You see, the miracle, the good deed that was done so that the good news that he had to share could be validated. And that's what we should be doing with our good deeds. Fourthly, good deeds will move people toward Jesus. When people are served and loved and they see good things going on, they're more apt to hear the good news, want to hear the good news behind it. I know I've said this several times, and I don't mean to beat an old dead horse, but the fact is nobody cares how much you know till they know how much you care. And good deeds create that curiosity that opens us up to be satisfied with a deeper understanding and conversations about spiritual matters. You wouldn't believe how many people at Martinton raised their hand this morning saying that they had the opportunity to have a conversation with somebody who wasn't a member of our church because of what we did on a roof up on Route 1. Good deeds open the doors and move people toward Jesus. But finally, good deeds create goodwill with the neighborhood and city. Good deeds help people and communities that are in need. I've had several people comment positively about what we're endeavoring to do at Martinton as a church. And in fact, I was in Kankakee one day at a store, and the conversation came up about what kind of job I had and where I was at, and I shared with them that I was the minister at that time of just Martinton Church of Christ. This has been a couple years ago before I started with you all. And the lady said, "Martinton Church of Christ, you're the ones who have the after-school time-in program, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, we are." She said, "That is just so great. And I understand that you basically are just helping kids with their homework." I said, "Yeah, we are. We have a snack and we show a VeggieTale movie, but other than that, we're just there for homework assistance and tutoring." She said, "Well, I just think that's so great. I heard about it." 25 miles, different community, had heard. But you know what? Good deeds are not the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. Romans 1:16 says that is reserved for the gospel, the good news. And Romans 10:17 says that faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word of Christ. So if we care about people coming to know Christ, we must be intentional about evangelism. We need to also be sharing the good news, not just good deeds. Francis of Assisi is credited with a statement, "Preach Christ at all times, and when necessary, use words." I want you to know that it's always necessary to use words. They need to accompany our good deeds that we're doing. If we're going to bring people into the kingdom, they certainly need to know about the King. Jim Collins and Jerry Porras had a best-selling book in the area of leadership that was entitled Built to Last: Successful Habits of Visionary Companies. Their main point wasn't anything really new. Their main point is that we tend to get caught up in the tyranny of the either-or. Is it going to be profit, or are we going to benefit the community? Are we going to push towards speed, or are we going to work on quality? And what they said is successful leaders release their companies to the genius of the end. And so I want to be a good leader, and I want to release you to the genius of the end. The genius of the end, A-N-D, is that we need to be doing both good deeds and proclaiming the good news. A life of faith must involve loving God, as we have said, and loving other people. And we must be genuine. That's why Sam Williams pointed out that in serving others, salvation is our ultimate motive, but it's not an ulterior motive, because people quickly sniff through people's motives. So, in order to share this opportunity, I just want to share with you 3 simple things about sharing the good news. Because you and I are all called to do it. It's not just my job. We're all called to do it. So where do we begin? Well, first of all, 1 Peter 3:13-16 says that you need to be ready to explain to somebody the hope that you have. So, first of all, we need to be people who have hope. My son asked me the other night. He said, "Are you afraid to die?" I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "I'm not ready to die. You kids are young enough that I don't want to leave your mother with that burden. There's a lot of things that I would still like to accomplish, but I'm not afraid to die." And he said, "Why not?" I said, well, because I know that when I die, I'm going to get to go to heaven and see my dad and see my grandparents and see a lot of other good friends that I've had. But most importantly, I'm going to get to be with God and Jesus. I think it satisfied him. But people are going to ask. And I want you to know that the first and most important thing that you can do if you want to tell somebody else about Jesus Christ is you need to begin by listening to the other person's story. There was a book written several decades ago now simply titled The Awesome Power of the Listening Ear. We need to be people who are willing to listen. And I mean seriously listen. Not listen so that we can respond. I'm guilty of that sometimes. I'll listen to somebody and I'm listening, trying to figure out ahead of time how I'm going to answer. We need to just sit back and be willing to listen. To listen to how people are hurting. To listen to where they're at in their spiritual journey. What it is that maybe has upset them in the past or turned them against the church. Turned them against God. But then, once we have listened, and hear me, we need to ask them permission to tell our story. Don't just jump in and start telling your story. Ask them permission. Say, I've listened to you and I really feel your pain. And can I share with you some of my story? And then take the opportunity to pick some of those elements in which your story intersects with theirs. So that you can show them how you received hope, how Christ has benefited you, how your life is better because you're a Christian. You don't have to be a trained theologian. You just have to be a person who realizes that we're all sinners, we are all in need, and you just happen to be someone who found some bread. You want to share with them where you found that bread. Ask permission to tell your story. And then ask them again permission to tell God's story. The story of salvation. Tom Rainer did a study that was presented last year at the Elders and Leaders Conference down at Lincoln. It's in a book. But what they found when they went out and investigated and interviewed unchurched people and people who were recently unchurched but now churched, they found out that there is a significant percentage of people in our world still today who are in fact willing to come to church with you if you will ask them. But they don't want you to ask them to meet them at the church. They want you to ask them to come with you. They're more likely to come if you're willing to say, we'll come by and pick you up. And then afterwards, maybe we'll go have a bite to eat together. They're willing to talk if we'll take that time to listen to them and open up to people genuinely. Let me close with some words that I really like from E. Stanley Jones. You need to understand the context. The context is that Stanley Jones was asked about the social gospel movement of the late 50s and early 60s. And here's what Stanley Jones said. An individual gospel without a social gospel is a soul without a body. And a social gospel without an individual gospel is a body without a soul. One is a ghost, the other a corpse. It's not an either or. The mistake of the social gospel movement of the late 50s and early 60s was that there was no attempt to proclaim the need for salvation. No sharing of the good news. I hope this doesn't make you upset or offend you. But I heard an interview of Joel Osteen, the minister of the large church down in Texas. And Joel Osteen, when asked, said, "Oh, no, I don't talk about